Jake Murphy wiped the grease from his hands and looked around the empty maintenance bay. The tools were clean and put away. His work shift was almost over. He had spent another day fixing small things that the alien crew thought were too simple for their attention. Broken door panels, stuck drawers, leaky pipes. Basic stuff that someone had to handle. The Stellar Dawn was huge. Jake had been on the ship for 3 months now, and he still got lost sometimes. The ship carried aliens from 12 different worlds, all working together on some big exploration mission. Jake was the only human in the maintenance department. Actually, he was one of only 5 humans on the entire ship. Most of the alien crew ignored him. They were polite enough. But Jake could tell they thought humans were not very smart. The Zentari engineers with their 6 arms could work on complex machines much faster than Jake could. The Vorthan scientists had brains that could do math problems in seconds that would take Jake hours. The Krek soldiers were stronger and tougher than any human. Jake did not mind being ignored. He liked working with his hands, liked solving problems. Even if the problems were small ones that the aliens considered beneath them, the ship shook slightly. Jake grabbed the workbench to steady himself. That was odd. The Stellar Dawn had artificial gravity and stabilizers that kept everything smooth. Jake had never felt the ship shake before. The lights flickered, then they went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. An alarm started beeping somewhere in the distance. Jake heard running footsteps in the corridor. Outside the maintenance bay, Jake grabbed his tool belt and headed for the door. Whatever was happening, someone might need help. The corridors were full of aliens moving quickly. Jake recognized some of them. Kolvex, the chief engineer, was rushing past with 3 other Zentari. Their 6 arms were moving fast, checking handheld devices and talking in their clicking language. Kolvex, Jake called out, "What's happening?" The Zentari barely slowed down. "Fusion core problem. Very bad. Stay out of the way, human." Followed anyway. He had never seen the fusion core, but he knew it was the heart of the ship. If something was wrong with it, everyone was in trouble. The engineering section was chaos. Aliens from different species were crowded around computer screens and control panels. Everyone was talking at once in different languages. Jake could see the worry on their faces. Even though their faces were nothing like human faces, through the crowd, Jake could see into the fusion core chamber. It was a huge room with a glowing ball of energy in the center. The ball was supposed to be steady and bright. Right now, it was flickering like a candle in the wind. "Pressure dropping in Sector 7, shouted a Vorthan scientist. "Magnetic containment failing," called out another Zentari engineer. "How long do we have?" That was Commander Dziska, the ship's captain. She was a tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms. Kolvex looked at his instruments. "Maybe 6 hours before complete failure. If the fusion core shuts down, we lose life support. If it explodes, we all die instantly." Commander Dziska nodded grimly. "Options. We're running every diagnostic we have," Kolvex said. "The AI cannot find the problem. The fusion core should be working perfectly, but it's not." Jake pushed through the crowd to get a better look. The fusion core was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It was like looking at a small star held in place by invisible forces. Jake could see the magnetic field generators around the chamber, huge machines that kept the fusion reaction contained. "What about emergency shutdown?" asked Dr. Zexmore, the ship's chief scientist. "We tried," Kolvex replied. "The system won't respond. Something is wrong, but we can't find what." Jake studied the scene. He had never worked on anything like this before, but he had fixed plenty of machines. There was always a reason when something broke. Sometimes it was obvious. Sometimes it was hidden. "Have you checked the secondary systems?" Jake asked. Aliens near him turned to stare. Jake realized they had forgotten he was there. "Secondary systems are fine," Kolvex said impatiently. "The problem is with the fusion core itself." "But what feeds into the fusion core?" Jake pressed. "What controls it?" "The quantum flux regulators, the magnetic field generators, the plasma injectors, the containment matrix." Kolvex listed quickly. "We've checked everything. All systems show normal operation." Jake nodded. He was getting an idea, but he needed to see more. Can I look at the readings? Several aliens made sounds that Jake thought might be laughter. Dr. Zexmore stepped forward. Human, this is not a broken door panel. This is the most complex system on the ship. Our best engineers cannot solve this problem. Maybe that's the problem, Jake said quietly. Commander the Ziska raised one of her hands for silence. Explain. Jake took a deep breath. Sometimes, when really smart people can't find an answer, it's because they're looking in the wrong place. They're thinking too hard about the big, complicated stuff and missing something simple. The fusion core is not simple, Kolvac said firmly. No, but maybe what's breaking it is, Jake replied. The chamber fell quiet except for the humming of machines and the distant alarm. Jake could feel all the alien eyes on him. He was just a human mechanic. What could he possibly know that they didn't? Commander the Ziska looked at the flickering fusion core, then back at Jake. We have 5.5 hours left. Our best minds are stumped. Do you really think you can help? Jake shrugged. I don't know, but I'd like to try. Dr. Zexmore made a dismissive gesture. This is foolish. We should focus on evacuation procedures. Evacuation to where? Commander the Ziska asked. We're between star systems. The nearest planet is months away. If we lose the ship, we all die. We looked at Jake again. What do you need? I need to see everything, Jake said. Not just the computer readings. I need to look at the actual machines. Touch them. Listen to them. Kolvex's 6 arms waved in agitation. Impossible. The radiation near the fusion core will kill you. About a protective suit. We have one, Kolvex admitted reluctantly. But human, you don't understand. This technology is far beyond your species. You cannot possibly let him try, Commander the Ziska interrupted. We're running out of time and options. 20 minutes later, Jake was sealed inside a bulky radiation suit. It was designed for Zentari, so it didn't fit very well, but it would protect him. The helmet had a built-in radio so he could talk to the engineering team. Jake walked slowly into the fusion core chamber. The energy ball was bigger than it had looked from outside and much brighter. Even through the suit's protection, Jake could feel the heat. He started at the edge of the chamber and worked his way around, looking at every machine, every cable, every connection. The aliens watched him through the observation windows, talking among themselves in worried voices. Jake found the magnetic field generators first, massive machines that hummed with power. He put his gloved hand on each one, feeling for vibrations. That shouldn't be there. It seemed fine. Next were the plasma injectors, complex devices that fed fuel into the fusion reaction. Jake listened carefully to the sounds they made. Everything seemed normal. The quantum flux regulators were smaller, but looked incredibly complicated. Jake had no idea what they did, but he could see their status lights. All green. All normal. Jake stepped back and looked at the whole chamber again. Something was wrong here, but what? Then he heard it. Tiny sound, almost lost in the hum of the big machines. A slight grinding noise, like metal touching metal when it shouldn't be. Jake followed the sound to a corner of the chamber, where a small device was mounted on the wall. It wasn't much bigger than a shoebox. Jake checked his suit's display and saw that radiation levels were lower here. The device was far from the fusion core itself. What's this thing? Jake asked over the radio. Harmonic dampener, Kolvex replied. It prevents resonance frequencies from building up in the containment field. Very minor component. Jake knelt down and put his helmet close to the device. The grinding sound was coming from inside it. I think something's wrong with it. It's impossible. Dr. Zexmore's voice crackled through the radio. The dampener is showing perfect function on all our instruments. Jake was already opening his toolkit. Sometimes instruments lie. Jake carefully removed the cover of the harmonic dampener. Inside, he could see tiny moving parts that looked like they came from a very expensive watch. Everything was small and precise and delicate. Human, what are you doing? Kolvex's voice came through the radio, sounding worried. Looking, Jake replied. He pulled out a small flashlight and shined it into the device. There's something wrong in here. Jake could see the problem right away. One of the tiny metal pieces was worn down. It was supposed to be round, but it had been ground into an oval shape. Every time it moved, it scraped against other parts. That was making the grinding sound. "The bearing is worn out," Jake announced. "What bearing?" Dr. Zexmore asked. "It's a little round thing in here." "It's supposed to spin freely, but it's all worn down. It's not spinning right anymore." There was silence on the radio for a moment. Then Kolvex spoke. "The harmonic dampener regulates micro-vibrations in the containment field. If the bearing is damaged, the dampener cannot function properly. But our instruments show it working perfectly," Dr. Zexmore protested. Jake looked closer at the worn bearing. "Your instruments probably measure the electrical signals going in and out, right?" "The electricity is fine. It's the mechanical part that's broken." "Mechanical failure," Commander Laziska said slowly. "You didn't think to check for that." Jake stood up and looked at the fusion core. It was still flickering, but now he thought. He understood why. This little bearing problem is causing tiny vibrations. The vibrations mess up the magnetic field. The magnetic field keeps the fusion reaction stable. No wonder it's acting up. "Even if you're right," Kolvex said, "we don't have replacement parts for the harmonic dampener. That component was built on Zentari Prime. The nearest replacement is 3 months away." Jake looked around the chamber. He was thinking about all. The machines he had fixed over the years, cars, trucks, factory equipment, spacecraft systems. Almost everything could be repaired if you were creative enough. "I don't need a replacement," Jake said. "I need to make one." "Make one?" Dr. Zexmore sounded shocked. "Human, that bearing was manufactured 2 tolerances of less than 1 micrometer. Your species doesn't have the technology to." "Maybe not," Jake interrupted. "But I bet I can make something that works well enough." Jake walked around the fusion core chamber looking at all the other machines. He was making a mental inventory of parts he might be able to use. The plasma injectors had some precision components. The magnetic field generators used high-quality materials. Even some of the monitoring equipment might have useful pieces. "Jake," Commander Laziska's voice was calm but urgent. "We have 4 hours left. What do you need?" "Access to the ship's machine shop," Jake said. "And permission to take parts from other systems." "What other systems?" Kolvex asked suspiciously. Jake was still thinking. "The food replicator in Section C has precision bearings. They're bigger than what I need, but I can machine them down. The backup navigation computer has some high-grade metal alloys I can use. And I'll need some tools from the military equipment storage." The food replicator. Dr. Zexmore sounded like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want to fix our fusion core with parts from a food machine?" "Good bearings are good bearings," Jake said simply. Commander Laziska was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "Do it. Whatever you need, you have authorization." Jake made his way out of the fusion core chamber and out of the radiation suit. The engineering bay was still crowded with worried aliens, but now they were all watching him. Jake tried to ignore the stares and focus on his plan. The machine shop was well equipped. Jake had used it a few times for simple repairs, but now he needed to do something much more complex. He gathered his materials. Bearings from the food replicator, metal from the navigation computer, precision cutting tools borrowed from the Krex military workshop. Jake started with the bearings. They were 3 times too big for the harmonic dampener, but they were made of the right kind of metal. Jake mounted one in a lathe and began carefully cutting it down to size. "What is he doing?" Jake could hear aliens whispering to each other as they watched through the workshop windows. "He's making the bearings smaller," Kolvex explained. "But the precision required is impossible for manual work." Jake ignored the comments and kept working. He had done precision work before, just not on this scale. The key was patience and taking very small cuts. Remove a tiny bit of material, measure, remove a tiny bit more. It took Jake an hour to get the bearing to the right size. When he was done, he held it up to the light. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. Next, Jake needed to make a housing for the bearing. The original housing was cracked, which was probably why the bearing had worn out in the first place. Used metal from the navigation computer to fabricate a new one. This was harder. Jake had to cut threads so the housing would screw into the harmonic dampener. He had to drill holes for the electrical connections. He had to make sure everything fit together properly. 2 hours remaining, Commander Ziska announced over the ship's communication system. Jake was sweating now, but not from the work. The pressure was getting to him. If he messed this up, everyone on the ship would die. No pressure at all. The new housing was finished. Jake test-fitted it with the bearing he had made. Everything seemed to work, but there was only one way to find out for sure. Jake put the radiation suit back on and returned to the fusion core chamber. The energy ball was flickering worse now, and Jake could hear alarms going off throughout the ship. Containment field down to 60%, someone reported. Jake knelt down next to the harmonic dampener and began removing the old parts. His hands were shaking a little inside the bulky gloves, but he forced himself to work carefully. One mistake could make things worse. The old bearing came out easily. It was so worn down that it fell apart in Jake's hands. Jake installed his handmade replacement, connected the electrical wires, and screwed the new housing into place. "Okay," Jake said over the radio. "Let's see if this works." Jake stepped back and watched the fusion core. For a moment, nothing happened. The energy ball kept flickering. Jake felt his heart sink then. Slowly, the flickering began to calm down. The energy ball grew brighter and more stable. The alarms stopped. "Containment field stabilizing," reported a Vorthan scientist, his voice full of amazement. "Pressure normalizing. In all sectors," called out a Zentari engineer. "Fusion efficiency increasing," Dr. Zexmore announced. "This is impossible. Efficiency is now 12% above normal levels." Jake pulled off his helmet and grinned. Sometimes simple fixes work the best. The engineering bay erupted in cheering. Aliens from different species were patting Jake on the back with whatever appendages they had. Commander Ziska pushed through the crowd and looked Jake in the eye. "You saved us all," she said simply. "Just doing my job," Jake replied. Dr. Zexmore was staring at his instruments with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand. The harmonic dampener is now functioning better than when it was new. How is that possible?" Jake shrugged. "Sometimes when you rebuild something from scratch, you can improve it. The original design was good, but it had a weak point. The housing cracked over time, which let dirt get to the bearing. My housing is stronger, but you made it by hand," Kolvex protested. "With primitive tools, our manufacturing systems are far more precise than anything your species can produce." "Precise isn't always better," Jake explained. "Sometimes you need something that's tough more than something that's perfect. My bearing might not be as smooth as the original, but it'll last longer." Commander Ziska looked thoughtful. "How did you know to look at the harmonic dampener?" "Our best diagnostic systems missed the problem completely." Jake considered the question. "I listened to the machine." "Machines make different sounds when something's wrong. Your computers can measure electrical signals and magnetic fields and all sorts of complicated things, but they can't hear when a bearing is grinding." "You diagnosed a critical system failure by listening to it?" Dr. Zexmore asked. "And feeling it," Jake added, "and looking at it with my own eyes." Sometimes the simple approach works when the complicated approach doesn't. The aliens looked at each other with expressions Jake couldn't read. He had a feeling they were thinking about something important, but he wasn't sure what. "Well," Jake said, picking up his tools, "I should get back to work. Got a food replicator to fix now that I borrowed its parts." As Jake walked away, he could hear the aliens talking excitedly among themselves in their various languages. Jake didn't understand most of what they were saying, but he caught a few words in the common tongue they all shared. Words like remarkable and impossible and how. Did they evolve such abilities? Jake just smiled and headed back to his workshop. He had machines to fix, and that was what made him happy. 3 days after Jake fixed the fusion core, everything on the ship had changed. Word of what happened spread quickly through the crew. Aliens who had never spoken to Jake before were now stopping him in the corridors to ask questions. "How did you know the bearing was worn?" asked a young Zentari engineer. "Why didn't you trust our diagnostic systems?" wondered a Vorthan scientist. "Where did you learn to work with such precision?" inquired a Krex officer. Jake tried to answer their questions, but he could see they didn't really understand his explanations. When he talked about listening to machines or feeling vibrations through his hands, They looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Dr. Zexmore was the most interested of all. The tall, pale scientist with large black eyes had been following Jake around for 2 days, taking notes on everything Jake did. Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable about it. "Dr. Zexmore," Jake said finally, "is there something I can help you with?" They were in the main corridor outside the dining hall. Dr. Zexmore looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then moved closer to Jake. "I want to understand," Dr. Zexmore said quietly. "What you did should have been impossible." Computers analyzed the fusion core problem for hours and found nothing. You looked at it for 20 minutes and solved it. How? Jake thought about it. "I guess I looked at it differently than your computers did." "But how differently? What did you see that our instruments missed?" "It's not about seeing," Jake said. "It's about putting things together. Your computers are really good at measuring stuff and following rules. But sometimes you need to break the rules a little bit." Dr. Zexmore made a note on his handheld device. "Break the rules. Interesting. Can you give me an example?" Jake pointed to a wall panel that was slightly loose. "See that panel? Your maintenance schedule probably says to check it every 6 months. But I can tell just by looking that it needs attention now." "How can you tell?" "The way it's sitting. The color is a little off where it meets the other panels. It's probably coming loose because the temperature changes in this section are different than what the engineers expected." Dr. Zexmore scanned the panel with his device. "You're correct. The fasteners are showing stress fractures. But my scanner had to do a detailed analysis to determine that. You saw it instantly." "Practice, I guess," Jake said. "Been fixing things since I was a kid. All humans fix things as children." Jake laughed. "Not all of them, but a lot of us do. We like to take stuff apart and put it back together. Sometimes we make it better." Dr. Zexmore was writing furiously now. "Fascinating. Yes. So this is learned behavior, not instinctive." "Wait. Both, maybe," Jake said. "Humans are curious, want to know how things work. And we're good at making tools and solving problems when we don't have the right equipment." Over the next few days, Dr. Zexmore arranged for Jake to work on different problems around the ship. Not repairs exactly, but puzzles. Strange situations where the normal procedures didn't work. The first test was in the hydroponics bay. The plants that provided fresh food for the crew were growing poorly in one section. The alien botanists had checked everything: light levels, nutrients, water flow, soil composition. Everything was perfect according to their instruments, but the plants were dying. Jake walked through the growing area, looking at the sick plants. They were yellow and wilted, like they weren't getting enough of something important. "What do your tests show?" Jake asked the chief botanist, a Vorthan named Kilvoth. "All parameters are optimal," Kilvoth replied. "It's spectrum correct nutrient. Balance perfect. Water pH ideal. The plants should be thriving." Jake knelt down next to one of the sick plants and touched the soil. It felt right. He looked up at the lights overhead. They were bright and seemed to cover the right colors. Then Jake noticed something. "These lights are new, aren't they?" "Yes," Kilvoth said. "We upgraded them last week for better efficiency." "You kept the same light schedule, of course?" "The plants require exactly 14 hours of light per day." Jake looked around the growing area again. Something was bothering him, but he couldn't figure out what. Then he realized what was missing. "There's no wind in here," Jake said. "Wind?" Kilvoth looked confused. "Why would plants need wind?" "Wind is just moving air. We provide optimal air circulation through the ventilation system. Plants on Earth need some movement," Jake explained. "Not just air circulation. Actual wind that moves the leaves around. It helps them grow stronger." Dr. Zexmore, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. "The plants evolved on worlds with atmospheric movement," right, Jake said. "And your new lights are more efficient, but they don't produce as much heat as the old ones. Less heat means less natural air convection. Less convection means less air movement around the plants." Jake found a small fan in the maintenance supplies and set it up to create gentle air movement in the growing area. Within 2 days, the plants were looking healthier. "Remarkable," Dr. Zexmore said, making more notes. "You identified a factor that our botanical experts completely overlooked. The second test was in the ship's communication array. Messages from other ships were coming through garbled and unclear. The communications specialists had run every diagnostic they could think of. All the equipment was working perfectly. Jake listened to some of the garbled messages. They sounded like voices underwater, distorted but almost understandable. "Did this start?" Jake asked. "4 days ago," replied the chief communications officer, a many-tentacled alien named Hestuel. "Right after we changed course to avoid that asteroid field." "Yes, but there's no connection." "We're nowhere near the asteroids now." Jake thought about it. "But changing course means we're traveling through a different part of space. Different space might have different things in it, such as, I don't know, dust, gas, tiny rocks, something that's interfering with your signals but not enough to show up on your instruments." Jake asked to see the ship's sensor readings for the area they were traveling through. The sensors showed empty space, but Jake noticed tiny fluctuations in the readings. The kind of fluctuations that computers would ignore as background noise. "There." Jake pointed at the screen. "Your sensors are picking up something, but your computers are filtering it out because it's too small to matter." "Cosmic dust," Hestel said after running a more detailed scan. "Particles so small, our systems automatically ignore them." "But lots of tiny particles can add up," Jake said. "Maybe if you adjust your communication frequency slightly, you can get through the interference." They tried Jake's suggestion. The messages came through clear and strong. Dr. Zexmore was practically vibrating with excitement. "You solved another problem that stumped our specialists." "How do you do it?" Jake shrugged. "I look for the simple explanation first. Most of the time when something breaks, it's because of something basic, something obvious that's easy to miss. If you're thinking too hard about complicated stuff, but how do you know what to look for?" "Experience, I guess. And I don't trust instruments as much as you do. Instruments can lie or miss things. I like to use my own senses too." Dr. Zexmore spent the next week running Jake through more tests. Problem after problem that the ship's experts couldn't solve. Jake solved most of them, usually within an hour or two. Each solution revealed something new about how Jake's mind worked. He made connections between things that seemed unrelated. He trusted hunches and feelings over hard data, wasn't afraid to try solutions that seemed too simple to work. Most importantly, Jake was comfortable with uncertainty. When he didn't know something for sure, he made educated guesses and tested them. The alien crew hated uncertainty. They wanted to understand everything completely before taking action. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Zexmore told Commander Dzieska in a private meeting. Jake didn't know about the meeting, but Dr. Zexmore's assistant later told him what was discussed. "Jake's cognitive processes are unlike anything we've encountered," Dr. Zexmore had said. "His brain makes intuitive leaps that our most advanced computers cannot replicate. He sees patterns and chaos. He finds order and randomness." "Is this typical of all humans, Commander?" Dzieska had asked. "I believe so, though Jake may be particularly gifted. Humans evolved on a dangerous world with limited resources. They had to be creative to survive. Their brains develop differently than ours. Different how? We think logically step by step, following established procedures. Humans think laterally. They make connections between distant concepts. They improvise solutions using whatever is available." Commander Dzieska had been quiet for a moment. "This kind of thinking could be very valuable, extremely valuable," Dr. Zexmore had agreed. "Imagine if we could understand it, study it, perhaps even replicate it." Jake didn't like the sound of that when he heard about it later. Something in Dr. Zexmore's interest was starting to feel less like scientific curiosity and more like something else. Something that made Jake uncomfortable, but Jake pushed those thoughts aside. He was just being paranoid. Dr. Zexmore was a scientist. Scientists studied things. That was normal. Jake went back to his regular duties, fixing small problems around the ship. But he noticed that Dr. Zexmore was still watching him. So now other aliens were watching too. Jake was becoming famous throughout the ship as the human who could solve impossible problems. Sarah Collins finished her security rounds and headed back to the main security office. It was late in the ship's night cycle, and most of the crew were asleep. Sarah liked the quiet hours when she could think without distractions. She had been worried about Jake for the past week. Her friend had become the most famous person on the ship, but he didn't seem happy about it. Jake looked tired and stressed. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching him. Someone usually was watching him. Sarah sat down at her security station and pulled up the daily reports. As a human security officer, she only had access to basic information. The aliens didn't fully trust humans with important security matters, but Sarah's clearance was enough to see patrol schedules, maintenance logs, and general ship operations. Something in the maintenance log caught her attention. Dr. Zexmore had requested access to Jake's quarters 3 times in the past week. The requests were approved each time, but Jake had been working during those visits. Dr. Zexmore was going into Jake's room when Jake wasn't there. That was strange. Sarah checked the medical logs. Dr. Zexmore had also ordered detailed brain scans for Jake, claiming it was routine health monitoring for humans. But Sarah knew the other humans on the ship hadn't received any brain scans. Sarah felt a cold feeling in her stomach. She started digging deeper into the computer system, using her security access to look at things she normally wouldn't check in the communication logs. Sarah found encrypted messages between Dr. Zexmore and someone called the Science Collective. The messages were mostly gibberish to Sarah, but she could make out a few words. Words like specimen and neural patterns and extraction procedures. Sarah's hands started shaking. They were talking about Jake like he was a laboratory animal. Sarah kept searching. In the ship's supply requisitions, she found orders for specialized medical equipment, brain surgery tools, life support systems designed to keep extracted organs alive outside the body, chemical preservatives for biological tissue. The equipment had been delivered to Dr. Zexmore's private laboratory 2 days ago. Sarah had to stop reading. She felt sick. She wanted to run to Jake's quarters and warn him right away, but she forced herself to stay calm. If she was right about what she had discovered, Jake was in terrible danger. But Sarah needed to be smart about this. Sarah accessed the ship's meeting schedules. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Zexmore had a private conference with Commander Visiska and several department heads. The meeting was classified, but Sarah could see the attendee list. Representatives from every major alien species on the ship would be there. Sarah tried to access the meeting agenda, but her clearance wasn't high enough. She needed more information, but getting it would mean breaking some serious rules. Sarah made her decision. She waited until the security chief was doing his rounds in another section of the ship, then used his computer access code. She had memorized it weeks ago, just in case of emergency. It's definitely qualified as an emergency with the chiefs. Clearance. Sarah could see much more of the ship's classified information. What she found made her blood run cold. The meeting tomorrow wasn't just about Jake. It was about all humans. Sarah found a document titled Human Cognitive Resource Allocation. The document outlined plans to bring more humans aboard Confederation ships, not as crew members, but as problem-solving resources. The Vorthan Science Collective wanted to study human brains in detail. They had plans to create neural interface technology that would let them access human thought processes directly. The proposal included diagrams of brain implants and surgical procedures. The Krex military command had their own ideas. They wanted to use humans as tactical advisors in combat situations. The document described humans as biological computers capable of creative, strategic thinking. It talked about keeping humans in controlled environments where they could be consulted when needed. But the worst proposal came from Dr. Zexmore and something called the Ethereal Council. Sarah had never heard of the Ethereal Council before, but their plan was horrifying. They wanted to extract Jake's brain and preserve it in a biomechanical system. The brain would be kept alive and conscious, connected to computers that could access its problem-solving abilities. Jake would become a living computer, trapped forever in a machine. The document said this was the most efficient way to study human cognition. Jake's brain could be tested and analyzed for centuries without the complications of keeping his whole body alive. Other human brains could be added to the system later. Sarah read the whole proposal twice, hoping she had misunderstood something, but the meaning was clear. They planned to cut Jake's brain out of his head and use it like a piece of equipment. Meeting tomorrow would decide which proposal to implement. Sarah realized that Jake had maybe 1 day left before they acted. Sarah quickly copied the files she had found onto a personal data storage device. She needed proof of what the aliens were planning. Then she carefully erased all traces of her unauthorized access and logged out of the security system. Sarah had to warn Jake, but she also had to be careful. If the aliens suspected that she knew about their plans, they might move faster. Or they might decide that Sarah was a security risk too. Sarah finished her shift and went to her quarters. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought about Jake trapped in a machine. His brain kept alive in a jar, while aliens used his thoughts for their own purposes. In the morning, Sarah found Jake in the main dining hall, eating breakfast alone. He looked tired and worried, like he hadn't slept much either. "Hey, Jake," Sarah said, sitting down across from him. "You look like hell." Jake managed a weak smile. "Thanks. You always know how to make a guy feel better. Seriously, what's wrong?" "You've been acting strange lately." Jake looked around the dining hall. Several aliens were watching them, including one of Dr. Zexmore's assistants. Jake lowered his voice. "I think something's going on," Jake said quietly. "Dr. Zexmore keeps asking me weird questions. Yesterday, he wanted to know if I had any family back on Earth. When I said no, he seemed happy about it." Sarah's heart sank. Of course they would want to use someone who wouldn't be missed. "Jake," Sarah said carefully, "we need to talk." "Somewhere private? Why? What's wrong?" Sarah looked around again. More aliens were watching them now. She couldn't explain here. "Meet me in Maintenance Bay 7 in an hour," Sarah whispered. And Jake, "Don't tell anyone where you're going." An hour later, Jake found Sarah in the empty Maintenance Bay. She had chosen it because it was one of the few places on the ship without security cameras. "Sarah, you're scaring me," Jake said. "What's this about?" Sarah pulled out her data storage device and connected it to a portable computer. "Jake, I need you to read something. But I have to warn you, it's going to upset you." Jake read the documents in silence. Sarah watched his face go pale, then angry, then scared. "They want to cut my brain out," Jake said finally. "That's the worst proposal," Sarah said. "Them are bad. They're planning to use humans like tools." Jake sat down heavily on a workbench. "I thought Dr. Zexmore was just interested in how I solved problems. I never thought—" "Jake, the meeting is happening right now. They're deciding what to do with you today." "What am I supposed to do? I can't fight the whole ship. Can't escape. We're in the middle of space." Sarah had been thinking about this all night. "We need help. There have to be some aliens on this ship who would think this is wrong." "Like who?" "Commander the Siska seems decent. Some of the younger crew members have been friendly to humans." Jake shook his head. "Sarah, these are orders from their government leaders. Even if some of them don't like it, they'll follow orders." Sarah knew Jake was probably right, but she couldn't give up, and we have to try something else. "Like what?" Sarah had one more idea, but it was desperate. "We make ourselves too valuable to lose. If they think they need both of us alive and free, maybe they won't go through with their plans." "How do we do that?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, "but you're the problem solver. There has to be a way." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he looked up at Sarah with a strange expression. "Maybe there is," Jake said slowly, "but it's risky. We'll need to act fast." "What's your idea?" "They want to study how humans think," Jake said. "Maybe I can show them something they've never seen before. Something that proves humans are more valuable as partners than as prisoners." Sarah didn't understand what Jake meant, but she could see the determination in his eyes. Whatever Jake was planning, it was their only chance. The meeting to decide. Jake's fate was happening right now, somewhere in the ship. But Jake was already working on a plan to save himself. Sarah just hoped it would work. Jake and Sarah didn't have much time. Alien leaders were meeting right now to decide Jake's fate. They needed to act before any decisions were made. "What's your plan?" Sarah asked. Jake was thinking fast. "Odd. They want to study how I solve problems?" "Right. So I'm going to give them a problem they can't solve without my help. But I'll only help if they agree to treat humans as equals, not experiments. What kind of problem? I'm going to break something important, Jake said. Something that only I know how to fix. Sarah looked worried. Jake, if you sabotage the ship, they might just decide you're too dangerous and kill you. Not sabotage, Jake said. I'm going to create a situation where they need human thinking to survive. But I'll do it in a way that shows we're partners, not tools. Jake started moving around the maintenance bay, gathering tools and equipment. First, I need you to find out where they're holding their meeting. Sarah checked her security access. Conference room A, deck 5. But Jake, I can't get in there. My clearance isn't high enough. You don't need to get in. I need you to create a distraction. Something that will bring the meeting to me. What kind of distraction? Jake was already working at a computer terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. I'm going to trigger a cascade failure in the ship's navigation system. It's nothing dangerous, but it'll look scary enough that they'll have to respond immediately. Can you really do that? I've been studying their systems for months, Jake said. I know where the weak points are. Jake accessed the ship's navigation computer through the maintenance terminal. He began making small changes to the routing protocols, creating conflicts that would build up over time. This will start showing errors in about 10 minutes, Jake explained. First small ones, then bigger ones. Within an hour, the navigation system will shut down completely to prevent damage. Then what? Then they'll call their best engineers to fix it. When the engineers can't figure it out, they'll have to ask me for help. Jake finished his work on the navigation system and moved to another terminal, but that's not enough. I need to make sure they understand that this isn't just about me. Jake began accessing other ship systems, not to break them, but to prepare demonstrations. He set up scenarios that would showcase different types of human problem-solving abilities. Sarah, I need you to send a message to the other humans on the ship. Tell them to be ready to help with technical problems. Just don't explain why. Just tell them to be prepared. Sarah used her security communicator to contact the other 3 humans aboard the Stellar Dawn. They were confused by her message. But agreed to stand by? Jake checked his watch. The navigation errors should start showing up any minute now. As if on cue, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Jake and Sarah could hear running footsteps in the corridors outside the maintenance bay. Navigation system showing multiple errors came an announcement over the ship's communication system. All department heads report to your stations. Jake smiled grimly. That's our cue. Jake and Sarah made their way toward the navigation control center. They could see aliens rushing around in panic. The main display screen showed red error messages and warning symbols. Commander the Siska was there, along with Kolvex and several other senior officers. Dr. Zexmore stood off to one side, looking frustrated that his meeting had been interrupted. What's the situation, Commander the Ziska? Asked Kolvex. Navigation computer is failing, Kolvex replied, his 6 arms working frantically at different control panels. Cascade errors in the routing protocols. We can't determine the cause. How long until complete failure? At this rate, maybe 30 minutes. After that, we'll be flying blind. Commander the Siska noticed Jake and Sarah approaching. This is not the time for human maintenance workers. Actually, Jake said loudly enough for everyone to hear this. Might be exactly the time. Dr. Zexmore stepped forward. Jake, you should not be here. Return to your quarters immediately. Why? Jake asked innocently. Don't you want to see how humans solve problems? Jake walked over to the main navigation display and studied the error messages. He had created them, so he knew exactly what was wrong, but he made a show of examining the situation carefully. Interesting, Jake said. Your computer is stuck in a logic loop. It's trying to resolve conflicts between different routing protocols. But the solutions it's finding create new conflicts. We know that, Kolvex said impatiently. We need to find the source of the original conflict. The source isn't the problem, Jake said. The problem is that your computer can only think in straight lines. It can't handle situations where there are multiple correct answers. Dr. Zexmore looked intrigued despite himself. Multiple correct answers, right, Jake said. Your computer is trying to find the one perfect solution. but sometimes you need to accept a solution that's good enough and move on. Jake turned to Commander Deceased. I can fix this. But first, I want to know something. Are you planning to cut my brain out of my head? The question fell like a bomb in the navigation center. Several aliens looked shocked. Dr. Zexmore went very still. Where did you hear that? Commander Dziska asked carefully. Does it matter? Jake replied. Is it true? Commander Dziska was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. It was being considered. Dr. Zexmore believes that studying your brain could benefit all of galactic civilization. By keeping me alive in a jar? The procedure would preserve your consciousness, Dr. Zexmore said defensively. He would continue. To exist, to think, to solve problems. But not to live, Jake said. Not to choose my own life. The navigation alarms were getting louder. More error messages appeared on the screens. 15 minutes until complete system failure, Kolvex announced. Jake looked around the room at all the alien faces. Here's what I propose. I'll fix your navigation system. But I want to do it in a way that shows you something important about humans. What do you mean, Commander? Dziska asked. Want to teach one of your people how to think like a human? Not just show them the solution, but actually teach them to solve problems the way humans do? Dr. Zexmore stepped forward eagerly. Would share your cognitive processes? With conditions, Jake said. First, no more talk about brain extraction or neural implants or keeping humans as prisoners. Second, humans get treated as equal partners in the Galactic Confederation, not as specimens or tools. And if we refuse? Dr. Zexmore asked. Jake shrugged. Then you can try to fix your navigation system without me. Good luck with that. The alarms were getting more urgent. Commander Dziska looked at the error-filled screens, then back at Jake. Very well, she said. Teach us. Jake turned to Dr. Zexmore. You want to understand how humans think? Let's start with the most important lesson. Humans don't work alone. Jake gestured to Sarah and spoke into his communicator. All humans to navigation control. We've got work to do. The other 3 humans aboard the ship arrived within minutes. Pete Morrison, the cook, Linda Hayes, the translator, and Kevin Clark, the communications technician. Here's lesson 1, Jake announced to the watching aliens. Humans collaborate. We share knowledge and build on each other's ideas. Jake quickly explained the navigation problem to his fellow humans. None of them were engineers, but they all understood the basic concepts. Jake said, You're good with timing and coordination from cooking. Can you see the pattern in these error cycles? Pete studied the displays. Yeah, it's like when you're cooking multiple dishes. It's one timer. Goes off and throws off your rhythm for everything else. Exactly, Jake said. Linda, you work with language translation. What do you think about these error messages? Linda looked at the alien text on the screens. The computer is using very precise language, but precision isn't always clear. Sometimes you need to be flexible with meaning. Kevin, you handle communications. What's your take? Kevin examined the routing protocols. It's like radio interference. Sometimes the clearest signal isn't the strongest one. Sometimes you need to use a weaker signal that doesn't conflict with other transmissions. Jake turned to Dr. Zexmore, who was watching in fascination. See what's happening here? Each human is bringing a different perspective from their own experience. We're not trying to find the one perfect answer. We're building a solution together. Jake and his team worked together on the navigation system. Jake guided the process, but each human contributed ideas from their own background. They talked through possibilities, tested different approaches, and built on each other's suggestions. The key, Jake explained to Dr. Zexmore as they worked, is not being afraid to be wrong. Humans make mistakes all the time, but we learn from them and try again. Within 20 minutes, they had the navigation system working again. But more than that, Dr. Zexmore had participated in the repair. Jake had walked him through the human problem-solving process step by step. I think I understand, Dr. Zexmore said slowly. Human intelligence is not individual. It's collective. You think together. Think differently, Jake corrected. But we share what we learn. That's what makes us strong. Commander Dziska looked impressed. This collaborative approach could be very valuable for the Confederation. It could be, Jake agreed, but only if humans are treated as partners, not property. Dr. Zexmore was examining his own work on the navigation system with wonder.
I
Solved the problem myself, using human methods. But I actually did it.